Thank you all so much for being here for George and David Lewis's Artist Talk. I'm really excited, as I'm sure all of you are. Before we get started, I'd like to begin with our land acknowledgement. Every part of this soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hallowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished. Chief Seattle, 1854. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is within the ancestral territory of the Suquamish, people of clear salt water, the Suquamish people. Expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers, the Suquamish live in harmony with the land and waterways along Washington's Central Sailor Sea as they have for thousands of years. Here, the Suquamish live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. We would also like to take a moment to thank our exhibition sponsors. Thank you all so much for making this happen. And I would also like to now introduce Greg Robinson.
Good afternoon, everyone. And it is BIMA's great pleasure to host George and David Lewis's retrospective titled Deeply Rooted. And this is one of two sold-out presentations. We are taping this, so it will be available also on BIMA's YouTube channel. What a beautiful thing to see some of the people who aren't here with us anymore, Frank Buxton and Terry Cole, and to learn so much more about your early, well, not so early career actually, but the point that you've really made it and starting to become so well known. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
How does it feel to watch that after 21 years?
Well, it was very emotional actually, and I was deeply appreciative that the thing had been made in the first place. But seeing us so much younger in the garden at its height was wonderful. Yeah, how about you, Davey?
Every time I watch it, I start crying. So it's very passionate. It's beautiful to see. It was very poignant at the time it was taped. It still is today. An interesting side on that was that Recreating Eden was a series that was done by the Canadian Public Broadcasting, and the season that they did us, they filmed 8 episodes, and we were the only ones in the United States that they filmed then. The next day they were flying off to Switzerland to film another couple. And they came with the idea of filming us in the garden and doing our work, but the producer very quickly picked up on the love story. And that was very evident in this. In 2005, that was pretty rare to see on TV. And when we first saw it aired on TV with everybody else, we were a little alarmed and concerned as exposing ourselves to what we just saw. But what transpired from it was probably 100 or so letters sent to us from people thanking us for what they saw, that they had not seen that before.
And not one hate letter.
Not what?
Not one hate letter.
Not one hate letter. They were just moved to see 2 men who had fallen in love and had created a life for themselves and were open enough to show it on TV.
I think one of the things that moved me most about this film was our 2 dogs, which are dead years now, but they were lovely and we loved them a lot.
One of the dogs you can see in the exhibit is actually Philo.
Yeah, the early, what is that made on, the painting of Philo?
Oh, that's...
Do you use your mic?
The painting that's a half circle in the gallery with the little dog, that was Philo, our Chihuahua, who came from Mexico. So...
Is that on concrete?
It's on concrete over styrofoam, but also there's fiberglass involved.
Yeah.
Early in our career, we learned very quickly that slabs of concrete, although they look like frescoes and they're really fun to paint on, they are really heavy. Mm-hmm. In fact, the one in the gallery, the dark one with the poppies and hostas, we had up to 10 docents who were helping put the show together. None of them would bring it upstairs. It was downstairs, and they were just too heavy. They couldn't carry it.
The install crew and the staff, it was actually, I think, Kim and I that put it in the basement to begin with. So George and David often have a lot of extra eggs and to give away, and he happened to bring some. There is a part of the film that talks about you passing out
Yeah.
in Greece on the road, and
Yeah.
George is carrying you across. What
Yeah,
it
so-
doesn't explain what happened.
I was prone to kidney stones, and we were on the Acropolis, and I began to feel not the pain, but just the sensation of about to pass a kidney stone. And I turned to George and I said, I think we need to get off of this rock and go back to the hotel. So we got down off the Acropolis. We were crossing the street, huge. It was probably, an 8-lane road. And we got halfway across, and I said, George, I think I'm going to pass out. And I just collapsed. And so as you heard, he dragged me across. He took me underneath. It said an olive tree. It actually was a pomegranate tree. And when I woke up, there he was, and you saw the result, the relationship. But the question that I have for the audience, the first person to shout out what I'm going to give you, the hint.
Shout the right answer.
Right, shout the right answer.
Yeah.
We'll get a dozen eggs from our chickens in this beautiful Little and Lewis crate. So the question is, as some of you know who have kidney stones, you don't always pass them right away. So if you could tell me what village in Greece I passed my kidney stone, you will be the recipient of these eggs. And don't be shy,
And you can't Google.
Yeah.
Turn your phones off.
And I can slowly give you hints, but does anybody have just any guess at the moment? I say it's a village. Sam knows. You can't say it. Yes, Sam knows. All right, I will say it's an ancient village. I'm sorry, say it again? No, not Crete.
Somebody just said it.
Who said Delphi? Congratulations. I think is that Maxine?
Yeah.
Congratulations. You get the eggs.
So this conversation is supposed to be kind of organic, but I did put some images together to help us talk through some things and just remind us of what we wanted to chat about. Look at the young love on these two pieces here. And just wondering about, I've always been curious about kind of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, because you, in terms of concrete work or garden work, but you also had some earlier influences that led to your interest. Like David, you talk about, well, when you were very young and your interest in archaeology, and it was you, George, that had the early concrete experience. Was that in Texas or?
Yes,
Yeah.
that was my life in Texas, yeah.
So before you two met, what was inspiring you? What moved you and maybe helped lead you to this career?
Well, my first partner was a painter. In fact, he did that portrait of me when I was 24. But I had always been interested in plants and gardens, and in particular water elements. And the two kind of went together. We went to Mexico a few times, and I saw all the beautiful stone fountains and wanted to know how I could do that because I wasn't going to carve stones like they do. So it was concrete. And that's how all that began. Yeah.
My early influence was, I think I mentioned in this video, that my parents took a sabbatical to Crete in 1970. We lived in a small fishing village called Ias Nicolas, which has now become incredibly touristy. But then we were literally the only Americans in town for the majority of the year that we were there. I had a donkey, and my father was helping the Ephor of Antiquities of Eastern Crete. He had a book that he was publishing, and my father happened to have some connections in the United States. So he worked with him to publish the book, and in doing so, we befriended the family, and his name was Kostas Tavares. He allowed me to come up to the museum and go into the laboratory and piece the pieces together from the sites that he had been excavating. And for a 14-year-old, that was so exciting. That sort of cemented for me my love of archaeology. Majored in classics in college. I applied to 3 of the best graduate programs to become an archaeologist. All 3 rejected me, and my father gave me a one-way ticket to Greece, where I became an illustrator. So I moved around from archaeological site to archaeological site, illustrating the things that the archaeologists were finding. I did that for 2 years. I worked at some really important sites. And then one day I woke up, and this is going to sound crazy, and you probably won't get it, but I was really missing pre-sweetened cereal. And I decided that it was time to come back to the United States.
Okay.
So, because the Greece was not in the, wasn't in the
Okay,
European.
next slide. Yeah. I also wonder, as an art curator, I'm dealing with a lot of people who move here or being here, they're so inspired by this Northwest vibe, the landscape, the plants and everything. You don't have a Northwest vibe in your work. Tell me a little bit more about the aesthetic, like your choices of these larger tropical, almost otherworldly kinds of plants.
Well, at the time we were gardening, there became a large fad for using tropicals, pushing the climate and trying to introduce tropicals that may or may not survive, but surprise, a lot of them did. And I love that thing, especially in connection with water, pools and fountains. And that led us to sculpting leaves from tropicals that could be used as fountains. And it worked. We became part of a group that were interested in the tropicalismo effect in gardening, and with our fountains, it was all a match made in heaven.
Yeah, I think George is right that people who came to see the garden would walk in through the gateway and they would be transported. They were no longer in the Pacific Northwest. They were somewhere else, and through the use of the large tropicals, the bananas and some of the other plants, through the color, people weren't using color in the gardens yet. And we started, creating great swatches of walls in different colors.
You mean architectural elements?
Architectural elements, yeah.
And we'll get to a couple of those slides because that was an important part of this show. You each have talked about kind of aha moments in your career, and David mentioned when George learned to make a capital or something.
Yes.
Can you talk about, if not that, but what are the real aha moments for you?
That was learning how to do capitals was fortuitous. I had been racking my brain to figure out how to turn one of the capitals with a round cushion under the square, and couldn't figure out how to turn it in plaster. But in the meantime, we went to Paris, and we're in the Louvre, and there was a big table with books and pamphlets that were for sale. So I was thumbing through them, and I came across this pamphlet on how to turn a theatrical column. It told me exactly what I needed to know. So snatched that thing up so fast. We came home and started right away. And that's where the good capitals that we did started.
So for me, I think that's a really good question, and in anticipation of that, I have a little list. So, as George made one as well, and his is really philosophical. Mine is just purely, just kind of like the moments that, oh my gosh. So, when I lived in New York, the first celebrity I ever saw was Julie Newmar, who was Catwoman. And Julie Newmar came to our garden. I was totally and utterly godsmacked. The 2 days filming with Martha Stewart, of course, was pretty incredible. The 4 days that PBS or CBS came to film us in recreating Eden. Once George and I were speaking at a Northwest Flower and Garden show, and we arrived and we saw this huge, huge line snaking around the auditorium. And I was wondering, what were they doing there? What are they there for? And it turns out us. meeting the thousands, literally thousands of visitors each season over the 2.5 decades that we were open. This one is personal, but falling even more in love with my husband as we work side by side. And then the retrospective. That is truly a moment that I never expected and has been incredibly emotional for both of us, I think, to see this work come in and see it all together.
That's great. I would just like to add to that, George and David, of course, have been deserving since BIMA was founded and started, long before that. But David is a founding board member, and he chose to, thank you very much, David, chair the art committee here. It's called Art Acquisitions and Exhibitions. And it was only recently Cynthia Hibbard, who's also here, a newer board member, has stepped in to chair it. So Bainbridge can be a little incestuous, and I just thought it might be good to wait until he was no longer chairing the art committee.
The thing is, if he had told me that 14 years ago, I would have stepped down. But Yorgo, what are yours? What are your
Aha moments.
Well, my list, well, it's not really a list, but let's see. Oh, one of the things that was most important for me and that I enjoyed the most was that as you work on a mirror or anything else and observe that they take on their own character, whether it's with color or shape, but they become an entity, and that's when you can begin to converse with them on a work level that was magical for me, and I think for you too.
Yeah, I told you his was going to be much more philosophical than mine. So.
Also, watching the garden become its own entity and knowing it was our entity as well. It's like a child. Let's see, Davey. What else here? I think that's sufficient.
When George and I, we collaborated really well together in our art. And we were approached, I think it was in 2005, to do a book. And that's what...
we were on the ferry boat.
Yeah, the Garden Gallery came from. And we sat down to write it, and we couldn't. We fought, and we fought, and we just could not write together. So as collaborating in art, we couldn't do it as writers. So we went back to the editor, and we said, I don't think we can do this. And we came up with the idea of then putting it into both voices. So when you see the book, you'll see that some pages are identified at the top as David and some as George. And that actually worked. And that particular book won the silver medal for Best Garden Book of the Year in 2005. So
That's great. And we have photos today. Barbara Dank, the photographer for the book, we have permission for those. Tidelands had a wonderful article on you recently. Some of the photos are from that photographer, and also Keith Broski, who works with our marketing department here, has come in and filmed the exhibition. And then Laura Zander, Dasha Moore, associate curator. Dasha isn't here today, but I want to thank her also for all of her help with this show. So I am curious, I don't know if you can attach a percentage to it, but how much of your work was creating art objects versus helping people to design or conceptualize gardens?
99% of it was creating art objects, and 1% was helping design. Yeah. I cannot read landscape plans. And we'd have clients come in, and they'd be so excited to meet us, and they'd roll out these plans, and I would just go totally into a coma. I just couldn't read them. George did much better. He was, at least you pretended to read them. But we would be asked to go over to people's homes and wave our hands and talk about various things, and we did.
We were good at that.
We were good at that.
It's basically just schmoozing with color scheme.
Yeah, now you know the secret. But I would say the majority of it was just really working in the garden and working in our studio.
In your garden.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank you for setting up this kind of studio how-to, what's a mold, and kind of we get a lot of visitors who are really curious about the process. And I think in your case, it's not, a lot of people don't really understand, and they're not familiar with concrete for sure. So that's in the show, and that's fun.
There were two elements of our business. One was kind of more the molded pieces. There's some of them in the show, the smaller pieces. George would sculpt them in clay, then we'd mold them, and then we would cast them repetitively and sell them to people who came to visit. Then there were the one-of-a-kind pieces, the mirrors and some of the larger, the
painted things.
The painted things, the rain tree, things like that were done more on either commission or just done for fun. But the mirrors especially were sort of ones that we really enjoyed doing.
And adding that light into these darker spaces. Having darker spaces in the garden is intriguing. I think that you were so committed to creating rooms inside of
That's
you know,
right.
in the outside, and then adding the light back that way.
Yes.
We had, I don't know, we could have had 200 pieces easily in this exhibition, and I think we capped it at 70 some. Lots of smaller pieces, and we made the decision, we didn't want it to look like a studio sale, so left the number of those things kind of spare, but we did have examples of many of the things, but not everything that they made. One of the things that's intrigued me so much is your use of color, and you've mentioned that. And I want to point out Karen Jensen, who's here sitting with her husband in the front. Karen is our volunteer colorist, interior designer on the island. She's worked with us since BIMA opened, helping to match, well, match isn't really the right word, but to select color concepts to go along with art shows. And working with David and George has picked the terracotta color and the blue color that's used in the wall. And the blue color actually comes from some of your work. And again, what is the, did you just enjoy those colors? Did you have combinations that seemed to work for you, and
Both
why?
of those things, yes. We especially loved the blue, which we came to call Little and Lewis blue. It was made from, I don't know where we first saw that, but it was a blue powder that was the most electric, incredible blue you can imagine. But when you combine it with paints, some with slightly different colors, mostly just white, it made this beautiful blue that we came to call Little and Lewis blue. And we wouldn't tell anybody how to make it.
I don't know if you remember the paint store in town for a long time had colors that they were naming after specific localities here on the island. And Mary Hall came to us and asked if we would give her the formula for the Little and Lewis blue. And we are very generous to this community, but we said no. We just didn't want it all over the place. But the blue came from Texas, from a company, and it's called cheap blue. To me,
I think it must
that
have
was,
been
music to my ears, because the other blues were so expensive, and this was cheap. And so we were able to create the blue
way
out of that.
We mixed it with acrylic paint, acrylic house paint, and then added some bonding agents and water, however much we needed for a wash or covering. And that's became Little and Lewis blue that we love.
George is, I want to give credit to George, who really is, as I said in the show, he's the creative muse for a lot of what we do. And he's an incredible colorist, an incredible painter. And so a lot of the pieces that you see in the show here in the mirrors and things like that, I would be usually doing the relief work, and then we would cast them, and then George would do the painting. So that was truly collaborative.
Yeah. And he was a lot younger, so he had to lift more concrete.
Yeah, I
than
had to
did.
lift more. When George, two things happened that were milestones, actually, and I didn't say this earlier. One was that in 2008, we had clients come from the East Coast, and as they're walking up the driveway, they said to us, if you ever want to sell your property, would you give us first right of refusal? And George and I looked at each other, and we said, make us a deal. And that afternoon, on a handshake, he bought our garden. And we had already owned the house next door, so we did have a place to go. But they were the most generous, most incredible people because they allowed us to stay there until we were ready to move.
Until we remodeled the house.
We remodeled the house next door. But it was just, we were ready to move on. We tried then to do Little and Lewis at the new house, but George quickly turned 70, and he said to me that he was not going to lift another bag of cement after 70. And so, although I won't have him stand up because he's embarrassed, but for years, 25 years that we did Little and Lewis, we had an assistant. His name is Henry. He's in the audience today. But I remember that the last job that we ever had was and at this time, now it's not good, but then it wasn't bad. We had a Russian oligarch who had gotten a copy of our book, and he used it as a catalog to order things from. And he ordered enough things that it literally filled up a container. And George had kind of by then retired. So it was Henry and I casting tons and tons of stuff. And it sat there for a year while they worked out the customs on how to get it to Russia.
I became very familiar with different chocolates.
And finally they picked it up, they shipped it out. About 2 months later, we got a call, and it was the Russian oligarch. He loved it, he wanted it all again. Would we create this order again for him? And we said no, we were done.
You were getting pretty good at saying no, over the years, yeah.
No.
So tell us about the rain tree, about bringing these two fountains. I have to say, museums are pretty set on one thing. You don't want a lot of bugs. You don't want spiders and snakes and flies and snails. I found one snail on the floor. But they of course had to have a living exhibition, and it's been wonderful. But we did say if they come in a few days early and sit on the floor, then we can see what drops off and crawls away. And we had a couple of volunteers who they're sensitive and wanted to save things, and that was fine. I didn't want to pay the paid staff to save a spider necessarily, but so it became a volunteer job. But just getting this here, but what's it like to have these as part of the show?
The rain tree, which you've seen if you've been into the gallery, that's on the screen now, weighs between 400 and 500 pounds, and it was lifted by 2 guys. I don't know how they did it, really. They had all these straps and belts. But anyway, it came from Cynthia's house, and now it's there. When we installed it and had it begin dripping, we were very excited, and suddenly we noticed that we could see these fine little spider webs up there. Very beautiful. This one became a little uneasy with insect life in the gallery.
There were 30 or 40 little spider babies, and their webs were this big to begin with. So
Now there are only
just a
2
minute.
left, and they're a lot bigger. So we know where the other 38 spiders went.
In order to dissuade Greg from getting rid of those 2, we've named them Cynthia and Frank.
yeah. And now I could give a talk at a museum conference that you really don't have to be that worried because David said no, all those little spiders will just eat each other, and they did because there wasn't. By the time the volunteers were done, there wasn't much left to eat. So,
Yeah.
okay.
As a kind of an administrator and as a board member for so many years, it was a really new experience for me to be on the other side as an artist. And working with Greg, he's an amazing curator, and he has a vision, and he knows what this vision is. He just doesn't always tell you. And so many times, Greg would get to half a sentence with me, and I sort of get it, and I turn to ask him, just explain a little bit more, and he's gone. So a lot of the times we just kind of went with the flow, and we sort of knew that it was all going to work out beautiful. And what you see out there is this guy's putting it together. So
Well, you had a lot of great ideas, and I think the love of the work from the collectors. I mean, people would pass off a pomegranate and be nervous like it's a newborn baby, and like watch you, take it away. And at some point, we only let them watch so much because we do have to pack it, put it in the van or the truck or whatever it is. But we had a lot of great help. I think what I would say is when you're dealing with an entire career that is as with the breadth and depth and the brilliance of yours, a curator doesn't have a plan going in. I mean, we really don't. I mean,
now we know.
There's scope and scale and balance, and you want some areas of gravity and surprise. But really, you just kind of helicopter around and keep digesting it and keep hearing from you and other people and the collectors and the volunteers. I mean, nobody's shy. We've created monsters over 13 years here. It's like it was so easy the first year or two. Nobody knew what to do, and I just point and tell them. But now everyone has an opinion. So, but anyway, it's the show evolved, I'm sure, in some ways, like your career has.
Yeah, it's been, I think I mentioned earlier, it's been incredibly emotional for both George and me to have this show put up, seeing these works that we haven't seen in years, and getting George, who, has some stamina issues as he's getting older. He loves coming down to the gallery every day, and he just sits there and he meets people and talks to them. And it's just energy. It's just pure energy. And for me, early on in the show, there was somebody who I didn't know who'd gone through, and she came up. And what's funny is we're in there, and people look at the picture on the walls, and they look at us, and they look at the pictures on the wall, and they look at us, and they, oh my God, are those the artists? What are they? And so someone came up to me, and she just said a simple sentence which just left me in tears. She goes, "We need this." It made it gave to me, rather than just even the honor of having this show, it gave purpose. It could be any artist, but she said, "We need this."
We need this right now. That just happened
Yeah, it
with
happened
me
recently.
a couple of days ago.
Did it? Another
Yeah,
person?
but I didn't know it was the same person. Or
Yeah, it could have been. She's just hanging out.
Yeah.
Well, people are coming back. I would be remiss if I did not point out that on your top left on the screen is the only piece of art for sale in the show, because the collectors aren't selling anything, believe me. And that has been generously donated by George and David to BIMA's auction. It will be in the live auction on June 20th. But that's your last chance, Texaco, I think, for a piece on the open market.
Should we open up?
Yeah, I just want to show a few of the photos also that Tidelands took. The article was wonderful, but they had a really nice photo session. So why don't we open it up for Q&A, and Cole has some portable mic, and he'll be passing that around for anyone who'd like to. And just do keep in mind that this is recorded, so I won't say who over there in the fourth row, two over, said, oh, then she'll make sure she doesn't ask any dumb questions. So anyway.
I have the privilege of being backdoor neighbors with George and David. So we get to hear the chickens.
Yes.
We get to hear the frogs. We get to hear George playing the piano.
Uh-oh.
And I had the privilege of having a personal delivery when we bought a mirror. It was one of the first concrete mirrors, and it came around the corner on a wagon with these two guys getting it to the house and on the wall. And I just feel, and also have a pedestal in my garden that has a monument on it. So it's just a thrill to see you getting all these accolades, because I've known it for a long time.
Thank you, Fran.
Thank you, Fran.
Well, I'm also one of your I shouldn't say old neighbors, I'm a longtime neighbor. I live down on B Road.
Okay.
And had the privilege of visiting you in your first house and seeing your garden. And I'm just curious, are you involved with the garden that's at your other house still?
So the gentleman that I mentioned earlier, Henry, who was our assistant, part of the sale of the house to the clients from the East Coast was that Henry came with it. So Henry is the caretaker there and has been so now for 19 years or something.
Has it been that long?
And we don't. Henry is completely capable of creating an incredible magical space over there. It's no longer open to the public, but yeah, we don't really have much say there. Our gardening these days is basically to our backyard, our private garden, where we spend, especially in the summer, hours out there with the 3 dogs and just reading and listening to classical music and just hanging out in the garden.
Cool. There's a question here.
My question is about the plants you choose to use in your garden. You've mentioned bananas a couple times. Could you mention a couple of other tropical type plants that you have discovered do survive in the Pacific Northwest?
Yep. So bananas, the only ones that are really hardy here are called Musa bassiu. Bassiu, and this particular winter was incredible. Nothing died back. They're amazing. One of my favorite plants, and this is not necessarily tropical, but it's quite beautiful, are abutilons. They seem to survive. Oh, you can winter them over here. We have a large solarium. It's 40 by 15 feet, where a lot of our tropicals come in. But the abutilons can stay out in the winter, and they are beautiful. They're, is there a common name for them? Flowering maple, maybe? Flowering maples, I think they are. And they come in so many different colors and beautiful flowers. And that's one of them. Can you think of any other? Go ahead.
You have Gunnera also.
We don't. We don't in this garden. We don't. Henry has in his, but we don't have in ours.
It's too big for our small garden.
Yeah.
But let's see what else. Oh, there's all sorts of
Your mic.
all sorts of cannas, and what other tropicals? Oh, we've got Hercules.
Yeah. Years ago, we picked up a little start from the Berkeley Botanical Gardens, and it was called Hercules, and it was a calla.
Yeah.
It is huge. It is. It's just. It
Huge.
just keeps growing
Yeah,
and growing. It's
It
ridiculous.
grows, especially the flowers, 6 feet out of the ground, and they're as big as a dinner plate.
And while they're not tropical, they're unusual enough to feel tropical.
Yeah.
You did mention that in your process, you stopped doing solid concrete.
Yes.
So how did you do it? You said you used styrofoam? And like, how do you?
Yeah, I think Greg was alluding to that earlier. We
Probably
stopped
with the painting.
Yeah, we stopped using the solid pieces of concrete for paintings, and George developed a technique where we used styrofoam and then covered it in a kind of a
We
fiber.
covered it with fiberglass dipped in cement powder and water with a bonding agent, and covered. It gave us wonderful surfaces. Looked like old stucco walls, and that's what we're doing.
But literally, you can lift it up with one hand. They're
Yeah.
just so light right now.
So why aren't you still doing that?
Very good question.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. We
got
can talk
old.
about it later.
Related to that, you talk about you have a lot of your old molds
Yeah.
still.
Yeah.
And I wonder, have you ever thought about licensing those somehow and having your work made still?
We actually did some of that for a few years. I worked for a
twice.
company in Houston
Yeah.
who produced a lot of designs that I'd done, but it's not very much fun.
No, and you
One
can't.
of a kind things are a lot more fun.
You can't control it, and we licensed our designs to 2 different companies, both of which went out of business. And I don't know if that's saying about us or what, but concrete companies don't last that long. Artistic concrete companies don't last that long. Yeah, so and to be very honest with you, and this is going to appall all of you, But ceremoniously, when we decided
Oh, yeah.
we no longer were doing Little and Lewis, we threw out all of our molds.
We cut them up and threw them away.
Yeah, we have the only ones that were left are in the show there. So we just thought we weren't going to do this anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a serious question.
Okay.
Could you elaborate on the comment that was made, we need this? I mean, is this more true
Oh.
today than maybe 20 years ago when you were talking?
Yes, yes. I
Yeah.
think this, and we won't get into any of this at the moment, but the state of our world is a really, really scary place. And they came into the gallery. There's no politics. There's no controversy. It's just art that feels good to look at. And that's what
Well,
she
it's a-
needed at the moment.
And I think a sense of something of beauty existing in the world on its own, for its own sake, is healthy. And people are drawn to that. It was one of the Russian writers, I can't remember, who said beauty will be the salvation of the world. And in a sense, that's right. And it depends on how you approach beauty and embrace it in your own inner world. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So, a lot of us know that you spent a lot of time living in Mexico. And I was wondering if being there had, to any degree, altered or amplified the way you approach color and form and so on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I loved the approach to color of the Mexican artists, in particular in San Miguel, which is where we spent most of our time, central Mexico. Yes, their use of color just really snowed me. And it was so vital and vibrant, and but somehow never cheap, never went over the top. Well, sometimes it did, of course, but it does that everywhere. But yeah, I was enthralled by the way color was used in Mexico, and it affected our own work. Did that answer your question? Sort of.
There's, the colors in Mexico and in Greece, for that matter, I think the word intentional comes up. There's nothing intentional about them. They really are more, they're just haphazard. They're just sort of done, and they're weathered. And that, to me, is important. That's not done with such intent that it looks that way. It needs to be spontaneous.
It is, and
Do you want the mic again? Yeah. Okay.
I think it's because it's so bright down there. The skies are so bright. You see
Yeah.
the same thing in African art and so on. It's
Yeah.
so bright, you can put almost any color together and it'll work. Is that, do you agree
Yeah,
with
that's right.
Yeah, the light, the air, all of that is
Yeah.
pretty beautiful.
And the way the light bounces around, off all the buildings, they're stone, and yeah, it just, they use color in the most incredible ways.
and a color that you see on a wall, at noon will look very different at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
And at 9 o'clock in
That's the
candlelight.
magic of color on a wall.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here, and I'd like